Our keynote speaker is the author of Chasing Gideon, the Elusive Quest for Poor People's Justice, which came out yesterday on the 50th anniversary of Gideon versus Wainwright. She's the contributing editor and writer at the Washington Post magazine. Her work has appeared in The Nation, Newsday, The New York Times, Mother Jones, The Village Voice, Salon, and Slate. She's the author of 2 other books, including Home Fires Burning, Married to the Military for Better or Worse. For her book, she traveled all over the country for a year and a half to explore the quality of indigent defense today. She had to travel across the country to come here today. She had a book signing yesterday in Maryland, had to take a car over to Washington, D.C. and took a red eye to be here. So we're very excited that she's here. Her well-researched and written investigation shows the stark inadequacies of our legal system. So let's give a warm San Francisco welcome to Karen Houppert.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here, if a bit sleepy. As Jeff Adachi said, my new book was really an effort to take the temperature of public defense across the country. And I visited a lot of public defenders' offices, watched a lot of trials, and discovered that there was a crisis in the courts that probably all of you are well aware of. And really tried to dig in and find out what was going on and where all these problems were arising from that we didn't really have equal justice 50 years after Gideon. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to read a little section of the book first and then talk for a few minutes and then read a very brief section. The section I'm going to read is in the conclusion, because it's about public defenders and a conference that I went to with public defenders. Since I thought there were probably quite a few of you in the audience, you might find it amusing. I don't know. The National Legal Aid and Defenders Association opened its 100-year anniversary conference in Washington, D.C. in 2011 with Reverend Michael Eric Dyson addressing the crowd of 300 public defenders and legal aid attorneys scattered in a hotel ballroom with space for many more. "Does the rest of society demonize you?" he said. "Of course. Do they suggest you are working for the wrong people? Of course they do. Do they say you're working for thugs and criminals? Of course they do," he said, working to rev up his tired audience with rhetorical flourishes. "But the work you do is vital and critical because the principles of democracy rest on the ability of ordinary citizens to get justice in our legal system." His voice rose in volume and picked up speed as he told the audience that they ought to consider themselves superheroes. "Maybe you don't have an S on your chest," he said. "No matter. Each of you is a superhero." It was an interesting observation, more desire than reality. The motley group of public defenders and legal aid attorneys sprinkled in the hall that day wore the resigned look and crumpled clothes of the system's legal workhorses. No power suits, no Brooks Brothers shirts, no Prada shoes. The men were the kind I had sat behind in too many courtrooms as a reporter over the years. Worn tweed jackets sprinkled with a layer of dandruff that glinted under fluorescent lights. Haircuts that might have been sharp 3 months ago, but now curled into the collars of their blazers. Wash and wear, no iron shirts from LL Bean. The women at the conference also wore their standard trial attire. The jacket that told the jury this was serious work, though it came from Marshall's and had cat hair trapped in the nap. The practical, if unglamorous, Born clogs. The canvas book bag from Barnes & Noble with a faded, disappearing image of a gaunt Virginia wolf. It was possible that shiny spandex, superpowers, and the attendant glory lurked beneath these frumpy clothes, hidden by slumped and tired frames, but it was a stretch. What Dyson was up to, clearly, was trying to rally the crowd with a renewed commitment to this unpopular work. Public defender as martyr to a losing cause, the rights of the indigent. This was a telling moment for me. Indicative of the sense from every single person I spoke to at this national conference, roughly 50 over the course of several days, that good work was possible for public defenders across the nation, but that the greater context in which they labored made it a Herculean effort that few could sustain. Indeed, public defender systems regularly hemorrhage attorneys who left in a blaze of fury or slowly simmered with resentment until they burnt out after a few years on the job. And this inadvertently emerges as a theme among the lawyers I report on in the course of this book. Carol D. Huneke, the first lawyer I talk about in Spokane, Washington, is a vocal critic of the status quo in the public defender's office in Spokane and finds herself fired. 21 hardworking public defenders in New Orleans are let go, and Greg Bright, I'm going to read you a little excerpt about his case. He's a client there. His attorney at the Innocence Project in New Orleans returned to England after several years' immersion in the American justice system. Miami Chief Public Defender Bennett Rumer fought a pitched battle to limit caseloads and reform the system, and after 30 years decided not to seek re-election. And Joseph Ramon, a committed and passionate public defender in Georgia, quit in frustration after trying his first death penalty case before a jury. Actually, I think Joseph, is J. Ramon here somewhere? Okay, here he is in the back. He actually, we talked afterwards, a couple months afterwards. He's working as a bartender in the Bay Area and gave me the best line in the book, which was that he drinks a lot less as a bartender than he did as a public defender. So, in some ways, Dyson's speech has totally missed the mark. Most of the public defenders out there are not particularly interested in being vigilante superheroes acting alone to save the world from injustice. They want some backup. They want to work within the existing framework of the laws of the land to protect their clients' rights. And mostly, they want the time and resources to do their job right without having to resort to heroics. Over and over, public defenders said they needed more time with their clients if they were to properly represent them. Clients don't trust the system, says Franny Forsman, a federal public defender in the District of Nevada for 22 years. Quote, "You can be the best smarty-pants lawyer out there, but the client doesn't know that or see it. There's a relationship of trust that has to happen because of the critical decisions that have to be made. Clients are asking, do I trust you enough to tell you the truth of what happened? And I need that information so I can see, for example, is this a self-defense case? There has to be enough time to create a relationship," she says. "That's where the difference is between rich and poor. The rich, because they're paying for their time, will have as much time with their lawyer as they need," end quote. It's a curious thing that everyone at the Public Defenders Conference knows that the system is broken. And indeed, almost everyone in all parts of the criminal justice system across the United States acknowledge deep flaws in the way representation is provided to poor people. Eric Holder Jr., Attorney General of the United States, also spoke to the American Council of Chief Defenders in 2009 about the urgent need to reform the system. Quote, "The obstacles to representing the indigent are well known," he said. "We know that resources for public defender programs lag far behind other justice system programs. They constitute about 3% of all criminal justice expenditures in our nation's largest counties." Sorry, I'm just going to skip ahead. "We hear of lawyers who cannot interview their clients properly, file appropriate motions, conduct fact investigations, or do many of the other things that an attorney should be able to do as a matter of course. Finally, we know that there are numerous institutional challenges in the public defense system, like budget shortfalls." Holder acknowledged that the challenges the system faced were not new, and quoted Justice Hugo Black, who saw the problem as long ago as 1963 when Gideon v. Wainwright came before the U.S. Supreme Court. Quote, "There can be no equal justice where the kind of trial a man gets depends on the amount of money he has," end quote. What can be done, Holder asks the audience. The question resonates, echoing and bouncing off the walls of marbled courthouses all across the nation, where the players know what needs to be done in a technical sense to fix the problem, but no one can generate the political will necessary to change things. 50 years after Gideon v. Wainwright, equal justice for all eludes us. So I just wanted to take a brief break from the reading and talk a little bit about why that issue is so hard for people to grasp and why reform efforts have been stymied. And it's been interesting for me reporting on this for the last year and a half and trying to talk to people, you know, at the office water cooler, in a bar, my friends at dinner parties, whatever. And I would just say the words indigent defense and people's eyes would glaze over. They're like, what is that, and what has that got to do with me, right? Even the word indigent, I've stopped using it, you know, I've started using the word poor people. It's hard for people to understand why this issue matters. And in the course of my reporting over a year and a half, all of the experts and the people in the legal system, I would always end all my interviews with the same question, which is, so you've got this problem. Why is it so hard to fix? Why is it so hard for people to understand this need? And what I got a lot of different answers, but I think what I really discovered was that for most people who don't live in this world that all of you live in, which is working as public defenders or advocates or in the criminal justice system, you know a lot about these issues, and you know what the stakes are, and you're meeting real people every day when you go out, you know, into courtrooms or into the jails. You're seeing these people, and you are understanding, you're hearing their stories, you're understanding their lives, and you understand what the stakes are for these people in terms of creating a fair system. Most Americans don't have that experience, and the whole idea, you know, you say it's not fair, I think people respond to that, but it's hard for them to see that. I think it's hard for them to visualize because they're not seeing these real faces and they're not hearing these stories. Even when we looked at the video and the poster, which is great for this conference, where it's Gideon's picture, there's something about seeing his face, this is a real person, and that personalizing of the issue that I think makes people respond in a profound way. And so I think, you know, in terms of reforming a system or any problem that you're trying to resolve, there's sort of two levels in which that works on. And as a journalist, I kind of try to toggle back and forth between these two things. And one is, how do you get an emotional response from people? People are moved to action by stories. They're moved to action by people's real life experiences, when they see somebody, when they feel it, when it's a narrative, when it's a compelling story. And then the second part of that is understanding and sharing with people the complexities of the problem so that they can understand how to act, what needs to be done to reform the system. And so one of the things I'd really like to encourage people here to do is to take this next year as an opportunity, when there is this attention focused on this issue, to take your own stories or the stories of your clients outside of your insular world and share them with the public. And that may mean rethinking the way you talk even sometimes about these issues. Like, people say the word parity, you know, between prosecutors' offices and public defender's office. Well, the public doesn't really know what that means, and they're like, parity, what is that? You know, so a level playing field. Or even words like individual, just say people, right? Don't try to remove the people you're talking to from the heart and soul of your experiences or your clients' experiences. So I think there's a real opportunity this year, and across the country, there are people who have been very involved in efforts to reform the system who are doing a full court press this year, right? So there's class action suits. People are attacking this from every angle and really trying to draw attention to it. But I do think that one critical aspect of reforming the system is generating the political will for the reform. That when the politicians, you know, some law and order politician, you know, goes on and on with this lock 'em up mentality, and people just nod their heads, right? Well, I think that if people are kind of better educated about these issues, they will call those politicians on the carpet and they'll say, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, you know? And I think that the mission, if I can give you guys that this year, would be to step outside your circle, your work circle, and bring this issue to the broader public so that they can create a change in the culture and the public's response to these issues that will then enable the politicians and legislators to make the reforms to the finances and the courts and et cetera that really need to happen. And one way I think of is a good way to do that, and I'm talking as I'm a journalist, what I'd call an advocacy journalist. That's usually said with a sneer, but I wear the badge proudly, is to reach out to reporters, because of course they do have that soapbox to share these stories with. So reach out to reporters in your local newspapers, crime reporters, whoever, and just invite them to spend a day with you. You know, invite them to spend a day looking at, just a day in your life as a public defender, a day in the life of you as a parole officer, whatever it is. And it's a tradition journalists use a lot with cops. We do a police ride-along, right? So invite them to do a ride-along kind of with you and step into your world and walk in your shoes for a while. And really, again, try to get the stories that you see every day out there to the general public. So that's your mission for this year, should you choose to accept it. And then I just wanted kind of, in that mode, and that's part of the way I wrote this book too, was to look at getting real people's stories. And again, Ramon, the public defender down in Georgia, was great because he let me follow a trial with them for a week and a half down in Georgia. And it was really an opportunity to bring to the public what it's like to be involved in a capital murder trial. So, but I'm going to read an excerpt from a guy who I wrote about down in New Orleans who was falsely imprisoned for 27 years, and he finally got out. His name's Greg Bright, and he was a very eloquent storyteller himself. So I'm just going to end by reading a short passage about him. Today, Greg Bright, 56, sits on the cement porch of his yellow clapboard house in New Orleans' 7th Ward and rests his hand on the head of his yellow dog, Q. It is 2012, and he often finds himself musing over the notion of time. Time past, time lost, time wasted. It feels like a minute since I've been out here, he says. It took some time to adjust to life on the outside, he admits, and once, on a dark, rainy morning, as he found himself biking 7 miles in the rain to his miserable job working the line in a chicken plant in Mississippi, he felt real despair. Just from recognizing that he was 47 years old and had never even owned a car. He tried hard to dismiss the sobering thought that, arrested at age 20 and doing 27 years of time, he'd been, quote, 7 more years in prison than I was on the streets, end quote. Sometimes, he says, it's little things like that that really threaten to drag him down into sorrow. So he chose to do something that both keeps those wasted years fresh in his memory, yet also mitigates the sense of powerlessness that he sometimes feels. He helps to educate others in the hopes that his story will spur reforms. He's not an educated man. His formal schooling stopped in 6th grade. But he is one of dozens and dozens of ex-cons who form a vital link in the post-Katrina criminal justice reform efforts through various organizations such as Resurrection After Exoneration. That's one that it's a holistic reentry program for ex-offenders. Greg tells his story to students, activists, politicians, church groups, friends, strangers, anybody with time to spare and an inclination to listen, doggedly putting on a face on an abstract idea, injustice. On this particular afternoon in May 2012, he tells his story to me for a 4th time. He is deeply preoccupied with the judge who repeatedly denied his motions over the years, the same one who was on the team prosecuting his murder case in 1976. The very month that Greg was released in 2003, the judge died. Greg goes into his house to retrieve the judge's yellowed and tattered obituary that he has kept these 9 years. He reads it, as he has done hundreds of times. The obituary, like all obituaries, says nice things. The judge may have been a good man, Greg muses. Quote, he might have been a good husband, a good father, a good friend to many people, and I'm sure he was. But people may be saying the same thing about me. Q, the dog, who lies panting at Greg's feet, lifts his head for a moment to look around, as if considering the matter. Then he lowers his head to rest his muzzle on Greg's shoe. Quote, but because I'm not a lawyer, but because I'm the little guy, man, you step on my head and crush me. I don't have money or influence or even God on my side, end quote. Interestingly, he saves most of his venom for the judge and the old boys network that got him a lawyer, but one friendly with the judge and disinclined to even work up a sweat when it came to Greg's case. It was a double murder trial that lasted 2 hours with no opening arguments or closing arguments. Gideon guaranteed him an attorney, but a flawed, indigent defense system and a lackluster lawyer rendered that almost meaningless. But why, he says. You know why? Sometimes I think about it. He wonders what the solutions are to the troubled criminal justice system here, to the high incarceration rates in the black community, to the racism and power imbalance. He talks on, indignant, furious, rambling, but right. He grows heated. Mostly he wonders how one draws attention to these problems, how change happens. Sometimes I think about, what is it, this Mahatma Gandhi thing, this passive resistance, he says. They crack your head to the skull. You get up and say to the man, thank you. He cracks your head again. You got to be an animal to continue that. That's what I felt the judge was doing to me every time I came forward. It's an outrage, end quote. He pauses, inhales, collects himself. But I'm not talking from bitterness. He says this, and yet, how can he let go of bitterness? Like a dog licking a wound, keeping it open and raw, Greg Bright revisits his past, alternately trying to decide whether he and the city of New Orleans get to have a happy ending or whether their shared story is a tragedy. Is it a happy ending because he now sits on the porch of the modest little yellow house he owns in New Orleans' 7th Ward, quote, my pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, as he once called it, after finally receiving $190,000 restitution? Or is it a tragedy because he wasted 27 years of his life behind bars? The criminal justice system in New Orleans, indeed the nation, seems similarly poised between plot twists, an ending that could go either way.